Okay, we've lost the audio. Webster, Tarpley, go ahead.
Let me just address, first of all, what I think is an overemphasis on the Israeli role. I think this is a distortion which is not supported by the facts, right? That you seem to be saying Netanyahu runs the United States or something like this. I think the obvious differences in power and potential are in front of everybody's eyes to see. Israel is a client state of the United States.
Oh, please.
Could not exist without U.S. military power, could not exist without U.S. subsidies. And, of course, the British, as Kevin was saying with Bernard Lewis, right, the British Arab Bureau is also a big power, and the British role on the Israeli side, I think, is also quite great. What he's talking about is Bernard Lewis's graduating thesis on the origins of Ismailism, and that this is where the Hashashin and the old man of the mountain come from. But let's look at the U.S. tradition, right? We're told that 9/11 is a deviation from the U.S. tradition. Well, I'm sorry, that's just baloney. That's just off the wall. We can go back to the foundation of U.S. imperialism, which I would say starts with the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898, I believe it is. And this is used by then the Hearst newspapers to run a hysterical campaign, very much like what we saw in 9/11. The explosion that sank the Maine was inside the vessel, not outside. That's the finding of Admiral Hyman Rickover, the founder of the U.S. nuclear Navy. We can then take it up to, say, the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. This is the provocation that starts the Vietnam War. It's attended by all that hysteria. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, seen by many as the immediate precursor of the post 9/11 resolution, right, that went through the Congress. Ron Paul voted for it, worth mentioning. Barbara Lee did not, but that's what got us on the road to the Afghan War. I would also point out the Kennedy assassination in many ways is a preparation for the Vietnam War. And here we get right to the heart of the matter. This is where Allen Dulles plays a role and is certainly part of the cover-up and may well have been part of the, well, in a general way, was certainly involved in the execution. The general who, some of the generals who were in power during the Kennedy assassination were proposing Operation Northwoods. My heavens. That's the American tradition. Here's a plan for a provocation to attack Cuba. And it's not used in the case of Cuba, but it is then used in the Gulf of Tonkin. So it's not like it didn't happen, right? Kay was claiming that this didn't happen, and of course it did. Lyman Lemnitzer is the general who signed Northwoods. He then went on to become the NATO commander in Europe. And here we get into Gladio, the stay-behind organizations. The stay-behind organizations are U.S. creations, they're NATO creations, and they are deposits of weapons, explosives, with guerrilla fighters grouped around them. The goal is, of course, to start guerrilla warfare in case the Soviets overrun Western Europe. So I think the tradition argument, all of this stuff seems to be making the U.S., it's an attempt to make the U.S. look good at the expense of somebody else. And I
disagree. It's a matter of fact, Webster. And I mean, I would say that you could list all the US's false flag attacks, and I could come back at you and list all of Israel's false flag attacks, and you're just arguing from history.
My argument is not based on this at all. My argument is based on the 46 drills. The 46 drills run by U.S. military officers, U.S. intelligence officers. This is an American operation, and my book is called... The Pentagon was
occupied by Zionists. It's well demonstrated.
I'm sure.
It's well demonstrated. And also, Webster, can I make one point? It's not baloney, because I have to ask you, how many Middle Eastern countries did the U.S. invade and intervene in overtly with its military in the Cold War? How many? This is not necessarily to help the Israelis at all.
Let me repeat. My book is called 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA.
I'm sorry, Webster. Webster.
Please stop interrupting, guys. I'm sorry. Made in USA means not made in Saudi Arabia, not made in Pakistan, not made in the myth-drenched regions of Bora Bora or whatever it is, and also not made in Israel in the sense that it was a plan concocted by the Zionist conspiracy. the idea that Israel dominates every feature of U.S. life, down to the details, is simply a grotesque distortion. It is scientifically and historically wrong, and it plays right into the hands of the CIA, because this is one of their favorite lines. The CIA agent in the Middle East is always there to say, we didn't do it, those Mossadniks did it, right? They're the ones who did it, we didn't do it. So this is what you're getting. You're essentially whitewashing the main center of imperialism and dumping it all on this subsidiary of U.S. British imperialism.
Joshua, I think you're quite right about that. The September 11th attack was contrary to traditional U.S. policy, which has been stability in the Middle East for the sake of oil. But I think if you look further than that, if you go back to around the beginning of the 80s, we can see a clear beginning of how this began to happen. So it was with Reagan's administration, as I argue in my book, The Host and the Parasite, How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America, that Israel, throughout the election of 1980, began to infiltrate the American government in a major way, such that by the end of Reagan's time, oil had ceased to become the prime determinant of U.S. policy. And by the time, Clinton becomes president, we have the United States almost as a full-blown subsidiary of Israel. And I'm afraid Mr. Tarpley, for all of his book writing, has got this issue completely ass backwards, because there's no scenario conceivable under which you could claim the United States as the dominant partner with Israel when you see how freely and with such impunity Israel humiliates the United States, ignores the United States, bullies its politicians, lies on its American television, extorts money from the U.S. Did you know that American citizens have to pay interest on the money that Israel is given in aid from the American Treasury? Israel is the only country in the U.S. that gets its annual aid in one lump sum in January, deposited in an interest-bearing account at the Federal Reserve. Americans pay interest on aid to Israel. I'm afraid that I just can't see how the United States can be in charge of a relationship when it voluntarily allows itself to be humiliated and its economy plundered. So I'm afraid Mr. Tarpley is looking at this through an old prism that sort of selectively cuts out certain frequencies of light.
Let me say that my prism is not the one of resentment or hate or a vendetta or I don't know what. The idea that this tiny postage stamp of land in the Middle East controls the immense continental resources of the United States through some kind of an automatic or mystical process, it's simply grotesque. And then when we add in the British, the entire Anglo-American imperialist system, according to you, is being wagged by the dog. Let me point out, in Samuel Huntington's scenario, the War of Civilizations, the Clash of Civilizations, we have the scenario precisely for the Third World War. And what happens to Israel in the course of that is that they are annihilated. They are overrun, and it ceases to exist. And Samuel Huntington basically says, too bad for them. I think this discussion is simply a dead end because it leads us away from the relevant evidence. The relevant evidence are the drills and Angel is next. Those are the two cardinal points. And any approach that leads away from these things is bankrupt and it's suspect.
No, it's not. I mean, you mistake Israel for a country. What's at issue here is not some postage-stamped little backwater on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, but that Israel is almost a supranational country. If you look at the degree to which Israel lobbies in Canada, the United States, England, throughout the world, manage to extort behavior and coerce conduct from foreign governments, you have to look at Israel as more than just the size of the land that it is illegally occupying. It is much larger than that. And I think you need to redefine what you mean by Israel. Israel is like a world cancer that has infected the body politic of the human race to such a degree that national governments are not able to formulate national policy. And that is simply true of the United States. It can't make any policy without permission of Israel. And you look at Obama and other presidents basically groveling on their knees to kiss the ring of the Israel lobby every year at the AIPAC. It's just humiliating And why would anybody humiliate himself on his own soil unless he had no choice?
Okay.